Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this day in 1988 that one of the most important, consequential, interesting, and great albums of all time was released. Just don't want to block anyone's view. And this was, of course, N.W.A.'s Straight Outta Compton, their first sort of proper, fully fledged album. Not their first per se, but their first in all but name. Now, this album changed the course of music. It wasn't the first conscious rap album. Public Enemy and others came before. It wasn't the first West Coast hip hop album that took the world by storm because Ice-T had already made a name for himself and put the West Coast on the map in terms of hip hop. But NWA did something that others, including the people I've mentioned, acknowledge as being supremely important, is that it took a very, very unapologetic form of what at the time they were calling reality rap. And I still love that name. It took it to the masses as nothing else ever did. And so while Ice-T and Public Enemy were very popular among their communities, Public Enemy among young black men of the East Coast, Ice-T on the West, and they were definitely growing into the wider mainstream in terms of other racial and ethnic groups and in terms of other regions of the US and the world. When NWA's Straight Outta Compton hit, it hit everyone hard all at once because it was the kind of thing that you just couldn't turn off. It was absolutely brilliant. Ice Cube and MC Ren had wonderful lyrics. They were the primary lyricists on the album. Dr. Dre's early production style was so raw and energetic. DJ Yella was the one who brought the sarcasm and the fun and the comedy, and it all just really came together. And then there was, of course, Eazy-E, who was one part gangster, one part comedian, one part just amused person who, he was there to amuse you, but if you told him that, well, that actually was a film made later, but you know what I'm getting at. It was a perfect album. It had reality, it had politics, it had stories about the injustice of the justice system, of police brutality. It had fun. It had positive encouragement. It had a bit of all of that. All of these very real emotions were on that album. And people can say, oh, well, Ice Cube came from a happy home. He wasn't ever a gangster, but he still grew up in South Central. He saw these things. He saw what was happening to their friends. And people say, oh, Dr. Dre was already in a group before that was sort of an electro pop group where he was dressed up in sequins and the doctor's stethoscope. But this was his community of Compton. This is what he was seeing. So don't tell me that there's anything fake about this album. Just because you haven't served a prison sentence doesn't mean that your life isn't impacted by the loss of jobs as the government started to take factories that were subsidized out of places like South Central LA and neighboring areas. Don't tell me that the issues of LA being so prosperous and so safe in the nice parts of the city in the 80s, but a totally different story in the other half of the city, that was very real. And these were very young men that were living it. And the idea that somehow they should be blamed because, oh, they weren't actual gangsters. Well, what are the people who say that trying to say that? Are they promoting gangsterism? Wouldn't it be better if people expressed themselves as NWA did, rather than go into crime? And isn't that one of the points of conscious hip hop, to get people to do things productive for themselves and for those around them? Anyway, that's a necessary tangent, but back to the album itself. It created instant fans, and it was one of those albums where, the kid who was really into Bon Jovi, uh last week, once he heard this album, he was an NWA fan, and he was now trying to look for other reality rap, other what became gangster rap, because that was the term they used to sell it instead of reality rap. Again, I prefer reality rap, but he became a fan, and so he would then look for all of the other artists that were in a similar genre, because once this album came out, other people doing this reality rap became much more prominent in the ears of the world, and shops began to sell it, even if mainstream FM radio didn't want to touch it because of the political content, because of the social content, and to, I would say, a lesser degree, the words used, because you had people like the Who that dropped F-bombs quite innocently. You had N-words on various funk albums here and there. So people say, oh, the radio stations didn't want it because of the words. I think it was more because of the sentences, if you know what I mean. But that didn't stop the album from propelling this genre into the driver's seat of music, so much so that by the 90s, a strong argument that I've made could be made that hip hop was the most interesting, innovative, and exciting genre, overtaking things like rock, which was previously the main genre of American and general European as well, music. And so hip hop became king by the 90s after just a few short years after this album came out. And of course, many of the people on the album became the biggest sellers and innovators in the 90s. Dr. Dre owned the 90s. Ice Cube owned the 90s in the first half as a music artist, in the second half as a filmmaker and as an actor. Eazy-E continued to put out great material, though we could say he was screwed by the man who thought that he thought was his friend. MC Ren delved more and more into he truly became a full-time conscious MC. And DJ Yellow, while we didn't hear from him as much, the interviews that he's given in more recent years show that his personality was the glue that held this all together. Of course, Arabian Prince was there at the very beginning. DOC was a big part of it, who became someone of great importance for the record that Dr. Dre produced for him before his accident in the late 80s. And again, the whole family of musicians that rose up around this. There was Warren G, a cousin of Dr. Dre, who became a pioneer of G-Funk along with Dre in the early 90s. He introduced his friend Snoop Dogg to Dr. Dre. He was part of Nate Dogg's circle in Long Beach with Warren G and Snoop Dogg. And so you see this family of West Coast rappers. West Coast Cam, a cousin of Ice Cube, one of my favorite rappers of all time. So it is just like you have coaching trees in sports, you can really have a West Coast hip hop tree that really all goes to this album. And Ice-T sort of stood alone as his own pioneer, even earlier at that time. But the importance of this album cannot be overstated. I even think that it was something that really sold because, well, let me put it this way. People will know what the term hate watching means. It's when there's a YouTube channel or a influencer that you really don't like, but you watch because you hate the person so much, and it gives you like a thrill. Oh, is someone going to screw up? Is something bad going to happen? I would say that this was an album that people hate listened to. So if you were someone inspired by it and who enjoyed it and was curious about it, obviously you loved it. But there were a lot of people listening to this because they thought, oh, this is going to corrupt the children. And this was a reflection of what was going on and a warning of what was to come. And it came true in 1992 in LA, didn't it? So it had that to it as well. So happy birthday, Straight Outta Compton. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.